All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for what I trust will be an informative discussion about which we've titled Advancing the Future of Aerospace Innovation. Our event today is underwritten by Raytheon Technologies. I'm Marcus Weisgerber from Defense One, where I write about the intersection of business and national security. And I have the pleasure today of speaking with three experts who are involved in fostering innovation in both the military and defense and aerospace sector. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. If you have any technical issues, just click on the help icon and members of our support team will be able to assist you. And the event will be recorded and will be available on demand, so you can share it with whoever you would like afterward. So now let me quickly introduce our panelists. We'll start with Brigadier General David Abba, who goes by Deke, who is the director of the Air Force F-35 Integration Office. And among other things, make sure the F-35 will remain technologically advanced for years to come. General, thanks for joining us. We have Colonel Nate Diller, who is the director of AFWorks, which connects airmen with new cutting-edge technology, oftentimes small innovators. So, Colonel, thank you for joining us. And lastly, Richard Avalapia, Vice President of Analysis for the Teal Group, who does an amazing job tracking the aerospace and defense sector and supply chains and lots of other things. Richard, thank you for joining us. So we're going to have a discussion, and I've told our panelists to feel free to build on each other's comments. I want it to be a discussion. Feel free to interrupt one another, and build on other people's comments, etc. We're going to focus our discussion today kind of around three key things and how the military is innovating now, where it needs to do a better job innovating, and what needs to be done to make that happen, be it policy changes, bureaucracy changes, etc. So, Deke, we'll start off with you. As I mentioned earlier, your job is to make sure the F-35 remains a relevant frontline fighter for the Air Force for years to come. So I could just start with a really easy question for you. So what does that mean, and what is it going to entail to actually make that happen?
Well, hey, Marcus, thanks to you and Defense One for hosting this. It's always a great opportunity to talk about the exciting things that are happening within the F-35 enterprise. As we talk about innovation within F-35, I think it's good to frame this in any discussion of innovation of why folks innovate to begin with. And it's typically to solve relevant problems that are facing institutions or organizations, or in this case, a particular weapons system. If you think about over the last 20 to 30 years in what has primarily been a counterinsurgency, counter-VEO, violent extremist organization kind of a fight, frankly, in a lot of ways, the United States military technologically wasn't pressed very hard. But as the 2018 National Defense Strategy articulates, the return of great power competition to the global stage really highlights the technological competitions that are happening with respect to the People's Republic of China and Russia as our two primary competitors in this. And so in the past, where we may have made value judgments on our acquisition system with adherence to cost, schedule, and performance kind of parameters, now we're talking a lot more about our innovation space as it relates to keeping pace with and outpacing our key competitors that are there. So as we think about this within F-35, there's really three major lines of effort that I would characterize. These aren't defined specifically anywhere, but just kind of synthesizing what takes up most of my day-to-day time. The first part of this is really software development. And this is where, as General Goldfein articulated very well last summer, software is going to be what allows us to outpace the Chinese and the Russians. In F-35, this manifests with what we call C2D2, or continuous capability development and delivery, in which we're delivering software operational flight program releases on 6-month increments. And we've got a very robust set of future-looking capabilities that we're going to continue to integrate on the airplane. Some of them are hardware dependent, but most of them are software related to ensure that our warfighters stay ahead. The next major line of effort with respect to innovation is happening within the logistics and sustainment structure of the program. ALICE, the Autonomic Logistics Information System, is well known within defense circles for being problematic over the years, and we're translating that, transforming that program into something that we're calling Odin. And I would say that the key differentiator with Odin with respect to ALICE is really the focus on the performance needs of the users, the warfighters that are out turning sorties on F-35s on a daily basis. And finally, I think the last major line of effort, and this is the case with any new technological innovation we bring into the field, is with our tactics, techniques, and procedures. While we're focused on developing the airplane to be optimized for the high-end fight, we are in the midst of our third consecutive almost heel-to-toe combat deployment in the Middle East. And so we've put the capability in the hands of our warfighters, and as always happens, they find new and creative ways to use the weapon system in ways that we hadn't really imagined when we initially devised the requirements.
Great. Well, we're going to, you touched on a number of things that I know we're going to talk about as we continue today: software, Alice, Odin, and that innovation maybe that airmen are finding when actually in the fight when the jet is deployed. Colonel Diller, let's move over to you. I'm sorry, Nate, he yelled at me not to call him Colonel Diller. We have to be more informal. Let's move over to you and talk a bit about AFWERX. Talk to us a little bit about how AFWERX, one, what you're doing on a daily basis, but two, kind of how it's evolved since its creation just three, I guess, short years ago.
Sure, thanks a lot, and thanks for the opportunity to spend some time here and talk about some of the things that we're doing. So AFWERX did a pretty significant reorganization, starting with our Vice Chief, General Wilson, who really has been the champion of AFWERX since its founding. When it started, really the intent was to get innovation in the hands of the warfighter. How do we really push that innovation out to the edge? And so you've seen a series of activities over the last couple of years with different challenges of bringing industry in to airman needs. You've seen some of the hubs where we have airmen, in places like Austin and Capital Factory. You've seen things like Spark cells and Spark tanks that are out at the different bases and as these competitions. So that had started. There was a couple of other experiments that were happening at the same time. One of them was AF Ventures. AF Ventures, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow during an Ask Me Anything with Dr. Roper tomorrow afternoon. Go to the AFWERX site to get more details on that if you're interested. But the idea that there's ways of leveraging capital in a different way than maybe we've done in the past. And I'll get into that as kind of the overarching thesis. The last was Agility Prime. And so those were kind of three different ad hoc efforts in innovation. What was thought is that these were all kind of relatively successful individually, but they really actually come together pretty nicely in a way that could be institutionalized beyond kind of that experimental phase. And so what you've seen over the last couple of months is a transition using the name AFWERX, but bringing AFWERX in now with these three different parts. And the idea is that, I was on joint staff doing a lot of F-35 work, done some work on the F-35 test. I was head of air and space requirements there on the joint staff, and kind of this ongoing mantra of how do we look at some of these capabilities that it's not a replacement for our existing kind of larger programs that we have, but you create a little bit of a hedge that actually makes these other existing capabilities potentially more valuable. And can you do that in a way that's relatively inexpensive? Can you do that in a way as we look into a future with this series of modernization efforts, notably nuclear modernization? How do you look at a world where we are able to pay for that modernization, but at the same time, do some things when you look at the National Defense Strategy, one of the other classified side, the comments that commercial technology is going to fundamentally change the world, and in particular, the way we're doing warfare. And when you look at the amount of research and development that is there in the commercial sector, fourfold increase of what we have internal to DoD. If we want to get to these new capabilities, kind of these potentially lower cost hedge capabilities, is there a way of using a partnership to do three things? One, expand the technology base. And this looks at some non-traditional actors. It looks at leveraging that commercial technology. Two, expanding the talent base. And this is using kind of that traditional AFWERX model. And technology by itself is not going to solve the problem. To the general's point, that TTP development, until you actually get the technology in the hands of airmen, it doesn't really provide capability. And so how do you find those airmen needs through non-traditional approaches, right? That expands that talent pool that is absorbing technology. And then the last is transition. How do you, even you have fantastic technology, fantastic talent looking how to use that technology, there's still this transition pace. And so how do you expand the ways of doing transition across this valley of death? And so those three parts of AFWorks were stood up and kind of merged together into one with AF Ventures, using some of these SBIR approaches for doing investment with capital that's existing out there in the market, from venture capital up to private equity, to strategic investors, family office, across the board. Can we de-risk some of that technology that's out there? Can we do it in a way that is actually solving some of those airman challenges? And then under the Prime, so those programs, AF Ventures, Spark is what we're calling this talent expansion. And then Prime is this transition expansion. And under Prime, creating first a Pathfinder program. This Pathfinder program is Agility Prime. The thought is there will be several behind Agility Prime, but how do we look at different ways? In this case, we look at another national defense strategy imperative, and that's logistics, doing logistics under attack using distributed logistics. Are there ways, as we look at a future where we may want to reduce a bit our dependence on runways? Can we start to use vertical takeoff and landing? When we look across the market that's there, there's been significant investment in this industry known as the advanced air mobility or urban air mobility, flying cars, orbs, as they've been referred to. Is there an opportunity, if industry believes, as Morgan Stanley report indicates, there's a $1.5 trillion market that's there in 10 to 20 years, is there a way of potentially using these vehicles for logistics to reduce our logistics cost, to potentially reduce the threat posed by doing distributed logistics, reduce the O&M costs that's potentially afforded by distributed electric propulsion, incorporate autonomy in ways that create additional safety and reduce personnel costs? And so we have started this partnership. We have leveraged with less than $50 million, well over $1 billion of private investment, commercial investment in these types of vehicles. Many of that we've been flying. A couple weeks ago, our Secretary and Chief of Staff saw one of the demonstrations of one of these vehicles down in Austin. Right, and the idea is that these are not necessarily replacing some of the higher end systems, but does it create an approach to logistics, an approach to sustainment, an approach to technology absorption that allows very quick fielding? So the idea that we are targeting now is a fielding of these vehicles by 2023. And again, this is the first of a series of primes that we look to use, that ideally you are taking, instead of going and asking the Congress for funding, how do we leverage the investment in the commercial sector and do that in a way that creates both, prosperity and advances in that commercial sector technology, as well as capability for our operators.
Great. And I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit more on the Agility Prime and the ventures that you mentioned. But quickly, first we'll go to Richard. And when it comes to the aerospace industry, and talk to us a little bit about how they're approaching innovation today. And perhaps maybe let's look at this in a little bit in the lines of with coronavirus right now and the pandemic, and the commercial aviation market kind of being hit so hard right now. Kind of maybe what's your forecast for how companies decide to invest the perhaps more limited resources that they're going to have in the coming years ahead?
Yeah, boy, so much to talk about. You said quickly. Have you got a while? I think there's a couple of
all the time in the world.
Oh, I appreciate that. Couple of mega trends. First of all, when we talk about commercial aero R&D, let's distinguish between, just like new space and old space, let's distinguish between new commercial aero and old commercial aero. Historically, of course, it's commercial aero, which had been diverging a bit from the military, had been for decades, because you've got essentially very different drivers. Basically, if it doesn't enhance revenue or doesn't lower costs, it has very little place in the R&D budget for any traditional commercial aero organization. And as a consequence of that and many other factors, there had been a greater divergence between civil and military aero for decades. The low-hanging fruit had been taken care of with the high bypass turbofan and the flight deck and of course wide body aircraft structures. That was all a while ago. We've had to work harder and harder to find any kind of overlap. And as you say, in this time of terrible crisis, guess what? R&D budgets are being hit even harder. People are becoming more risk averse. And of course, long-term projects are being put off. Even what should have been just coming around the corner, Boeing's 777X has been put off a year just because of this pandemic. And not only that, people are getting more conservative about the approach, fewer clean sheet designs, fewer opportunities for the kind of technological boost we've seen in recent years. Geared turbofan from Pratt & Whitney, it's been a fantastic success story. It's taken many years. Would it have been launched in today's environment? No, certainly not. It's a good thing the stuff that was seeded years ago is now coming to fruition because it's being delayed. And even when new things are being launched, this conservatism is lending itself towards derivatives, an emphasis on very targeted technological developments, primarily related to propulsion, rather than the kind of let's reinvent stuff. Now, in the midst of this comes, of course, new commercial aero, the other side of the house. And that's what Nate was talking about. That is fascinating. I tend to be maybe even a bit of an outlier. I tend to see tremendous carnage ahead in that industry, but we're just starting in that hype cycle. It's going to be a long ride up that hype cycle. And it's sort of intriguing. Most of the investments coming into this industry are not from traditional aero. They're coming from, well, Silicon Valley or new producers, and I wish them all the best. And like all hype cycles, it's going to produce technologies that will be salvageable after the crash. And that's why I'm kind of fascinated by Nate's job there. I think there'll be hundreds of millions, billions invested. There are over 200 people competing for the urban air mobility market or who want to compete for that market right now. It's going to get ugly, but a lot of interesting stuff is going to be invented. The classic story of the railroads, a lot of people lost a lot of money, but we ended up with a pretty cool nationwide network of rails that connect us all together to this day. So there's lots of stuff to watch for, but also we have to be really careful about the winners and losers, because some new technology approaches are going to be, well, as disastrous as the programs behind them, as the platforms behind them. So how do you call the right one? How do you make sure the right one gets additional buy-in from DoD? That's a hard job, certainly a very worthwhile effort, I think, because there's, as I'm saying, an awful lot of cash flowing into that industry. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
Nate, to build on that, how does so take Richard's view of the in terms of the flying car market and such, and the new aero world, if you will. Kind of how are you viewing the pandemic in terms, one of just your ability for people to pitch you the whatever they're making? A lot of the companies you deal with in some cases are small, very small businesses. Are you seeing any trends there? And back to the first part about kind of how do you view the whole new aero type market?
Sure, I'll start with the COVID piece. I mean, you can't deny the fact that there are certainly challenges just in terms of being able to move forward. On the same side, I would think I think some interesting points from a capital perspective, from a supply chain perspective, and from a government engagement perspective, that we, across all three of those, we have heard this COVID almost being a blessing in some regards. Again, there have been some delays with testing. All these are small companies though, and so pretty quickly, as a result, they're pretty agile. There's not much bureaucracy, and they very quickly, with things starting in March, they were in many cases testing again at something pretty akin to their normal tempo by April. So the fact that they're small, I think, maybe mitigated that to some degree. From a capital perspective, I think what we found is that you certainly had maybe a little bit less venture capital, but as you started to look with some of the interest that DoD had created in this, there were still a series of, and again, the types of investors, family office investors that are looking at more of a long-term piece. Why are we doing Agility Prime? Kind of three key perspectives that we look at. The strategic perspective that we can't cede this industry to the adversary in the way that we have with the drone industry. So there's a strategic imperative that if there indeed is a new industry here, how do we make sure that that industry takes hold in the United States? There's this process perspective. This is a little bit internal, but that's thinking a little bit differently about how we do innovation. And the last perspective is we're actually interested in it. So as we've kind of communicated that, I think we found in many cases that capital for many of our partners in the Agility Prime program has continued to flow. And it's come from a variety of different places, to include the auto industry, for example. From the COVID perspective, again, there's cases where I think this has strengthened relationships across the interagency work that we've done. Several of the companies have said they have had a way of communicating with FAA that they've never had, a speed of response from FAA that's just been unprecedented, that's allowed them to move forward on their certification path much faster. Across a variety of those things, I think there's maybe been, and in the last piece, supply chain, a very clear understanding that we have to think a little bit differently about our supply chain, our domestic supply chain. A couple of years ago in this industry, when you asked where are motors coming from, where are batteries coming from, and the answer was almost inevitably overseas. In many cases, what you're hearing today is where are your motors coming from? And the answer is copper's coming in the back door and motors are coming out the front door. So I think across those three areas, there may actually be a net benefit in the long term from what's actually happened from COVID, based on some awareness and just kind of shaking a little bit how government interacts with these new companies.
Have you seen any instances of company, like small businesses that you're investing in? Have they I guess bluntly, go under at all?
So far, none of the partners that we've had some that certainly have had concerns. There were some where you had, some of the auto ventures initially say, hey, the optics not so great if we're investing in flying cars when, the world is falling apart around us. That lasted for a couple of months, and then suddenly you saw a lot of those investors now getting back in. So, no doubt. What Rich said, you can't have 200 players in this and think there's going to be anything viable. There's going to be a culling, pretty notable, of this entire industry. That said, if you believe that innovation happens in small companies and small places, there's a stack of those companies out there that are creating some very interesting intellectual property that will flow in. There's going to be mergers and acquisitions that happen. What role the government plays and all that, I think, is important. But I can't say we've actually, there was some thought that at the beginning of COVID, there were about 250 different designs out there. The thought was, that was kind of the apex. We aren't going to see any more. There's 300 designs out there. So for whatever reason, this hasn't necessarily, and I think that it goes a little bit to the point, from a broader strategic perspective, there's potentially a pretty notable opportunity here in the United States to rethink dramatically how we are doing production, how we're doing manufacturing. When you look at the things that are happening in advanced manufacturing, and when you start applying autonomy, at a new level, you're maybe creating opportunities here that we're not going to go back to what we had done 20 years ago, but you're creating really an entirely new industrial base under this, with an entirely new approach. And we're running some advanced manufacturing Olympics, for example, and in AFWorks. You're seeing, I think, an appetite where you almost have kind of this artisan approach to manufacturing that allows prototyping faster, allows ideas to come to fruition faster, and eventually scale production in ways that we haven't seen before.
Deke, how about over in your world? What's coronavirus been like? I think I know you had a number of milestones for Odin, which is the new logistics system for the F-35. I know that a lot of that was supposed to happen in the coming months. How are you doing there? And I'll also point out that I believe March 9th was the last day I went to work, because I went to actually see you speak on this subject at the Mitchell Institute that day. So you were probably the last person from work, a work-related person I've actually physically seen in person.
I'm sorry for that, Marcus. With respect to the COVID impacts, Certainly across the F-35 enterprise, particularly on the industry side, we have seen impacts. We've seen some production slowdowns. It's been fairly well documented in the press. But I think, from back to Nate's comments about thinking differently about manufacturing, we have a very mature F-35 production line. And so there's certain things that have to happen in that workspace there. I think the program office and all of our industry partners have really done a remarkable job of coping in devising really creative solutions to supply chain challenges, et cetera. But the other thing that we've seen across F-35, and was just highlighted in another meeting that I had this morning, is it has offered a tremendous amount of innovation space just in our business processes and how we do things, right? We were all expecting, I think, on the government side, a pretty dramatic slowdown in the numbers of things that we accomplish. And I think what we've actually gotten to is a pretty effective triage of delineating the things that absolutely have to be done versus the things that we were just kind of doing from a traditional practice perspective before. So, back to Nate's earlier comments about, the tragedy of the coronavirus is also, there's the flip side of that coin of creating opportunities for us to be able to do things teleworking. Even just doing this webcast right now that on March 9th would have been pretty laughable. From having the right kinds of IT solutions and the authorities, et cetera, from a policy perspective to be able to do this just simply didn't exist. So it goes back to some of those opening comments that I made about the drivers of innovation is usually some compelling pressure or problem that you're trying to solve. And there's no doubt that this coronavirus tragedy has provided tremendous impetus for people to think about doing things differently.
Let's build on that, and let's shift over to software for a little bit. You talked in your opening about wanting to be able to kind of push the software updates to the F-35 say every 6 months. I kind of think of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, akin to like a Tesla getting updated with its push updates while it's in the garage at night. What have you done differently to make that happen? And I guess where do you still need to keep going to make it continue to work or work even better?
Well, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, Marcus. I think the department, I think, writ large is struggling is probably a strong word, but really spending a lot of intellectual effort trying to figure out exactly how we do this migration into the new business processes and development processes associated with agile development cycles when you've got programs that have been in existence for a long time, right? And it's a matter of public record that F-35 first passed the acquisition milestone B in October of 2001. This program's been in development for an awfully long time. I can tell you just personally, the very first discussion I had about open mission systems kinds of architectures is roughly about 10 years old. And we were spending some time with Lockheed Martin at the time in F-22 talking about how we could accelerate capabilities going forward and having discussions like, wouldn't it be cool if we had kind of like an underlying iOS like you have with Apple in the ability to go to various app stores? And that just seemed kind of other planetary at the time back in 2010. And I'll tell you, you use the Tesla analogy. I'll give you a different car example. I think the first car I had that had a map display in it, a moving map, was the 2006 truck that I owned. And it was a Toyota. And when it was time to update my map, I had to go to Toyota and buy my Toyota CD or DVD rather to upload the latest in the maps. Over time, right, you started to see that industry be disrupted by Google Maps and Waze and some of the other purveyors that are out there. And today you can't buy an organic OEM kind of a moving map. Everybody's compatible with either Apple's sort of CarPlay or Android stuff, and you've got access to Waze or Google Maps or all these other kinds of things. And that's exactly the same disruption that's happening within the defense space. But instead of this multiple cars that I've owned since that first 2006, I have my car that has a DVD loader for a map display that didn't get the benefit of all those interim steps of innovation along the way. And now all of a sudden, I really want to be able to load the newest version of Waze in my airplane, but I don't have the underlying architecture to get there. So we've got to make the investments in the hardware and in the firmware, in addition to the software, along with the policies. And that goes from requirements to planning and programming, and how we overall manage these programs, to be able to introduce those incremental steps along the way. Because if we wait 15, 20 years in between these, it just becomes untenable. It becomes overly expensive, right? So you've seen this in every weapon system that's going on, that we have in the Air Force, is everybody's trying to adapt on the fly to incorporate concepts like open mission systems architecture to allow us to become more agile, so that we can deliver those sorts of capabilities at higher degrees of trust. We incorporate better modeling and simulation so that we don't have as many discoveries in test, things that escape the lab, and then fewer discoveries or escapes once things make it out into the field. So it's a long lift, but there's really, I mean, when I look back just 10 years ago, a tremendous amount of progress. I don't think it's going as fast as any of us would like, but we're still trying to update our 20-year-old car, if you will.
Richard, how's the commercial industry? I'm thinking the commercial airline industry. How are they approaching software like that? Do they have that Tesla model, if you will, where the avionics or whatever, or the displays, are they getting updated when they are sitting at a gate overnight at an airport, or kind of how are they thinking?
Well, better and better. I think some of the most interesting software advances in the aerospace, on the commercial aerospace side, have been on logistics and inventory management and everything related to onboard diagnostics, anything to do with sustainment. Because getting back to one of the big divergences between civil and military is, of course, our need in the commercial side of the house to either raise revenue or lower costs. And nothing lowers costs like improving sustainment. So I would argue that there's been probably the closest thing we have to a revolution in a rather derivative industry is in predictive diagnostics, inventory management, and everything related to sustainment that, of course, I think the military side of the house has benefited from to a certain extent. Obviously, they're a completely different set of operational drivers. Otherwise, bit mixed. We do certainly have avionics packages that have gotten better and better, and we've been disrupted too. The idea of Garmin doing larger business jets, avionics suites, was laughable 15 years ago, and now, it's taken very, very seriously. And that certainly put the traditional providers, the big three, on notice that they've also got to move with the times and get a bit more agile on that front, and I think they're doing that. Now, in terms of software development, the sort of MBSE and everything like that, so far it hasn't worked out absolutely uniformly flawlessly. We're hoping. Right now, it seems like there's a bit more work going on the military side. Boeing at one point was hoping to launch a new jetliner using the latest in MBSE and whatever else. That hasn't worked out. Instead, it looks like T7 and other programs are going to be more of an interesting test case for developmental software and modeling. We'll have to see about that. But from the standpoint of the here and now, it's really about sustainment and operations. I would argue that's proven the most interesting and useful pool of experience.
Mm-hmm. Nate, on your side, are you getting a lot of? Have there been any innovative type software solutions? I guess, have you seen pitched anything that kind of stands out as to a way of maybe cracking open some of these older weapon systems and being able to, or any unique tools that you've seen that the military might not have been aware of that have come in through AFWERX?
Sure, I think both AFWERX and then in Agility Prime in particular, I think it's been interesting to see. Again, I spent 10 years working on F-35 in different forms and fashions through test or acquisition in the Pentagon. Sensor fusion is something that obviously makes that aircraft stand out in a very notable way. I think the thing that's been interesting is some of these companies, in this space with Agility Prime on electric vertical takeoff and landing, some of the ones that I think are really providing the most value is where you've got some retired F-35 flight test engineers, other engineers. You go mix that with recently graduated, high-end AI students, graduate students, and you get a level of sensor integration. You're taking very low-cost sensors and you're bringing them together to pull together solutions for navigation, for example, or for sense of void, for example, that I think will provide some learning for us in how you do that sensor. It's kind of in the next stage of sensor fusion. So I think there's some interesting perspectives there. There's also, as we look at opportunities with digital engineering and long-term sustainment, what does that look like if you have this digital twin from the very outset, and you can not only do potentially faster iterations on your design, on your manufacturing lines, potentially in your airworthiness approaches, but then long-term, what does that do when you start to move the type of data around that you might be able to with these platforms in order to drive down long-term operating costs. So I think those two areas are some that are most interesting to us as we kind of go into this new market, and bringing in some of the non-traditional players. You can't, obviously, in all this discussion of software, you can't avoid the issue of security, and again, some interesting approaches to security out there. Obviously, we have a lot to offer in DoD. Spent a good amount of time in my career on different approaches to software security, embedded software security. And so there's cases where we have, I think, a pretty notable value proposition to industry, but vice versa. There are some clever things that you can find, obviously, in Silicon Valley, but maybe even in a lot of places outside of that, to maybe help us think a little bit differently about our cyber resiliency.
Mm-hmm. Deke, in your former role as the 53rd Wing Commander, you did a lot of updating of older type weapon systems with more modern stuff. I guess what was one of your biggest challenges in that role? Was it software?
It was definitely software. I think if I had to identify the number one kind of common thread across everything, because all of our weapon systems, including the mighty, venerable, ancient B-52, is a software-driven system in the way that we employ that weapon system to deliver the kinds of effects that we need to. But you've got also varying degrees of maturity in weapon systems, from newly fielded things to some of those well-established ones. But as we think about this and some of the commentary that Nate's offered on this looking forward, it's also interesting to remember that we've got to find ways to stitch this entire force together, and because we've learned in particular over the last several years, as the domains of warfighting become more and more interconnected, space, cyber, air, land, sea, that there's much more ability to influence kind of cross-court, if you will, on that. And so the old sports analogy of being as strong as your weakest link is there from both an offensive potential perspective as well as defensive and cyber vulnerabilities types of things. So thinking really holistically about how we employ our force, some of the lessons that the developmental test community has learned out of their Orange Flag efforts out at Edwards, some of the large force test events that the 53rd Wing was sponsoring, figuring in starting to think a lot more holistically about the comprehensive employment of force packages, et cetera. And the common thread for sure that intersects all of those is the software piece, but also echo what Richard was talking about. I mean, we only get those warfighting effects if we have the ability to resupply and sustain them and maintain them, including increasingly with contested supply chains, both kinetically and non-kinetically, and thinking about how we would have to support those kinds of weapon systems in a high-end fight. So lots of challenges underway there, but clearly software a common thread.
All right, I'm being actually given the hook, but I want to give Colonel Diller, Nate, I want to give you one more last chance for one more. I interviewed a small space startup founder a few weeks ago, and he was really complimentary of things like AFWorks and DIU and the work that's being done. But he said there still needs to be more done, and this company just finished a really successful Series A. But there's still more that needs to be done to kind of help the little guy, if you will, get into the game. Can you talk about what's being done to institutionalize what you're doing at AFWorks throughout program offices, perhaps?
Sure. I mean, part of it comes through one, us being good, being good partners with those companies that are out there. And so that means moving at speeds that are relevant to the commercial sector. So employing ourselves some software practices. We've done a great job. So we are now AFWorks under the Air Force Research Laboratory. They've done a fantastic job, under the Center of Excellence, getting through, awarding 1,000 contracts in less than a year. There are things that we can continue to do to accelerate that, to make sure that we're keeping good communication out there, right? Deploying almost $1 billion of capital into these sectors, but doing it in a way through the SBIR process. So these small business contracts that go, first just getting companies to understand what it's like to work with DoD, trying to bring ourselves into the 21st century so that we're easy to work with. Once they're doing that, right, these are small $50,000 contracts. The next step is a phase 2 contract up to $1 million-ish. And then eventually an opportunity with these phase 2 contracts of getting to more notable, $30, $40 million contracts that help us bridge a little bit some of our challenges institutionally, as a result of a 2-year budgeting process, and being sure that we're, one, communicating that to those that are interested, that we're acting quickly with these contracts, that we are being able to provide, right, stay on this trust curve when, in terms of what's being offered. And then eventually the other key is following through. There's an article just over the last week, talking about our prototyping efforts have been great, but eventually these have to turn into programs that actually scale. And so that's where kind of this Agility Prime effort goes in, that the prototyping is super, but I think probably one of the biggest criticisms is how do you eventually turn that into a scalable and fieldable capability? And that's where we're really driving with Agility Prime and the follow-on primes that we're looking to do.
Hey, Marcus, can I jump on that real quick?
Yeah, go for it, Deke.
Yeah, so the same comments that Nate's making about the impacts of contracts, I would argue are just as equally viable as we're talking about the large traditional defense primes, right? Because our contracting activities is where our ideas and our intent to go fast and everything else actually becomes reality. And that all comes down to incentivizing the kinds of collaboration that we need and in the outcomes that we need from industry. And we didn't really talk too much about the challenges today, but the big defense primes in particular have very mature business models that are used to doing business in a certain way. And this whole concept of accelerating, I think they very much, my sense from all my industry interactions, they absolutely want to work with us, but this has got to be a collaborative approach. It can't be something that's imposed. It's got to be something where we work together to find a way to generate the kinds of military outcomes that we need while allowing industry to do exactly what they need to continue doing as well.
So Richard, I'll give you the last word now. Is collaboration possible?
I would hope so. One thing that hits me listening to my colleagues talk is that they might not have that much in common with traditional commercial aero, but they certainly do with the Silicon Valley approach that affects, new aero, if you will. And the question becomes, how can that cultural spirit, migrate over to the big primes, and how can they affect their thinking and be more innovative? You look at what Silicon Valley is characterized by, put a bunch of $10 million bets on a bunch of stuff, fail early, fail often. A couple of them will be unicorns, either in the sense of economics or war fighting. And I understand, that this seems to be a natural area of thinking that overlaps between Silicon Valley and DoD. So the very big question is, and I think Deke was alluding to this, how do you get the spirit to benefit and have the primes, and have the primes thereby do the kind of innovation that DoD needs? It's going to be really interesting from a contract vehicle standpoint, maybe a company within a company standpoint. Do you maintain the sort of legacy identities of smaller, more innovative companies that are absorbed by the bigger primes, kind of like In-Situ or Aurora Flight Sciences that have been purchased by Boeing? Can that even be possible? Is the whole concept of a company within a company possible? This is the big question, that intersection between the way of thinking that I think the military and Silicon Valley have in common and, the traditional commercial aero prime? It's going to be a big challenge.
Well, I feel we were just getting going really good, so maybe we'll have to have a part two at some point down the road. But I want to thank our three panelists for joining us. I want to say a special thank you to some of my colleagues behind the scenes, Claire, Haley, and Anna, who helped put this event on. Thank you very much. And I now will turn the program over to James Hansen, Vice President and Publisher of NextGov.
Great. Thank you, Marcus, for that engaging discussion. Once again, my name is James Hansen, Vice President and Publisher of NextGov, the Federal Technology Division of Government Executive Media Group. I'm really excited to continue today's conversation on aerospace innovation with Roy Azevedo, President of Raytheon Intelligence and Space. Roy, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So Raytheon with United Technologies earlier this year created 4 new businesses with you at the head of Raytheon Intelligence and Space. How are you positioning your business in the broader aerospace and defense industry?
Well, you know, James, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, while a new business under Raytheon Technology, brings well-established and leading positions in our sector with a broad portfolio of advanced technologies and solutions to help our customers operate in any domain against any challenge. At our core, we're focused on strengthening and growing our business in 3 areas. And those 3 areas are sensing and effects, command, control, and communication, and training and services. With the sensing and effects area, we're delivering intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information and non-kinetic effects across domains including multispectral, multifunction sensing, precision targeting, and electronic warfare and cyber solutions. Our strength in this area is rooted in our leadership in AESA radars and EOIR solutions, and it continues as we grow our high-energy laser weapon systems. In command and control and communications, we're enabling secure information dominance and multi-domain intelligence for the new battle space. And we're doing it through automated ISR and battle management systems that provide secure and trusted information for timely decisions, which is key. We provide command and control and secure communication solutions that support military and civil customers in all domains, including air traffic management modernization, satellite communications, and advanced battle management. In the training and services, we're using innovative approaches and proven tools to keep our customers mission ready, cyber resilient, and prepared for high consequence tasks. We're a global training leader across industries and military forces in helping our customers ready their personnel. You know, I say often that opportunities like this don't come along very often to launch a business, and I'm particularly excited because I know what we're capable of. We have the best talent, the best experience, and our employees are passionate to deliver for the ones that keep us safe.
That's really exciting. That's really exciting times for you guys. The speed of battle has certainly increased and will only accelerate in the future. What role does technology, particularly automation and sensing, play in ensuring future tactical fighters can outpace those of our adversaries?
There's so much data across systems, platforms, and domains, but data alone isn't enough. So unless you can convert it into actionable insight that enables near instantaneous decision-making, I'm not sure what good it does. It's from assessing enemy threats to estimating response effectiveness to presenting optimal courses of action. We're giving commanders the situational awareness they need to ensure mission success. So from image and pattern recognition to sensor tasking and orchestration, Raytheon Technologies is using artificial intelligence and machine learning to automate existing command and control systems. This enables commanders to assimilate available information in context and automatically generate successful courses of action. So I'd say technology plays a critical role, and keeping pace with its accelerated advancements is paramount to designing systems that are going to endure modern force operations and environmental stresses so that our tactical aircraft continue to have the advantage in the air battle space. as well as other mission essential frontline platforms that operate in other domains. Making the right technology and engineering investments is key to providing our sensors that see further, communications that are more secure, and networks that are cyber resilient. Our work in advancing open architecture design is integral to providing subsystems that comprehend, integrate, and control vast amounts of data and can accommodate modernization and insertion of third-party solutions. We believe that's key to keeping pace with technological advances. How you engineer can make as much of an impact as the technology itself. Raytheon Intelligence and Space's transformation to implementing a fully integrated digital engineering environment that spans model-based systems engineering, as well as cost, production, and sustainment, is going to result in shorter development cycles, reduced development cost, and faster capability delivery to the warfighter.
Yeah, speaking of integration and multi-domain, all joint domain operations, how do you see space and what many view as becoming one of the more contested domains? How do you see space shaping the future battlefield?
Yeah, James, the fact is space is already a contested domain. Space is used not only in our daily lives, but our global economy and our national security depends on it. And as countries test and deploy counter space systems, the need for advanced space capabilities is pretty clear. Raytheon Intelligence and Space pulls from a deep bench of space-proven technology, quickly designing and producing innovative solutions. We have more than 20 independent advanced payloads in production today. Our space systems team is a leading and well-proven space technology house. Over 100 sensors launched, more than 450 instrument years in space, 100% successful turn-on rate after launch. Fast innovation isn't exclusive to the commercial industry. We've designed, built, and launched advanced systems in less than 30 months, like our infrared imaging space experiment, or IRIS-X, which is an electro-optical instrument for the United States Air Force Research Lab. And with production, we've invested in advanced techniques and systems to enable a one payload a month schedule on programs like Worldview Legion.
So I know we're running short on time. I feel we could talk forever on the innovation and the direction that Raytheon Intelligence and Space is going. But can you highlight another emerging technology that Raytheon Intelligence and Space is developing that will define other military capabilities in the future?
So, while we've been fighting and investing in counterinsurgency as a nation for the last 20 years, our nation's principal adversaries have been studying us. They've invested in technological advancements and taken geopolitical actions that have effectively eroded our long-held comparative military advantage. Our response can't rely on a shiny new piece of technology alone. To gain back what we've lost, we've got to do something far more challenging. We must change the way the war is fought. Battles will span every domain simultaneously, and we believe success is going to hinge on our ability to make smart decisions, prosecute them in seconds, not hours. Realizing this vision requires a revolutionary approach to battle management with a simple premise at its core. Get the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make the right decisions and take actions to win the fight. The innovation will be in how we link these capabilities across time and space. Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2, is going to provide seamless integration connecting mission-critical military platforms and systems worldwide across all domains: air, land, sea, cyber, and space. We're contributing to the foundational JADC2 technologies, including resilient networks, advanced sensors, battle management capabilities, DevSecOps software development environments, effectors, and as I mentioned earlier, open systems architecture. Our model-based engineering, rooted in rapid experimentation and virtual prototyping, is at the heart of our approach across the board to help customers turn this deluge of intelligence data into smart, real-time decisions and actions at speed in any threat environment at scale.
Thank you, Roy, for sharing that, and thank you for the service that you and Raytheon Intelligence Space are providing to our military and government. It looks like, unfortunately, we're about at the end of our program, so I would just like to thank Marcus and our fabulous speakers from earlier again. Roy, thank you for participating today, and our audience for tuning in. Today would not be possible if it were not for the support of our underwriter, Raytheon Technologies. The full webcast has been recorded, and you will receive a link to watch it again in your email inbox later this week. Please pass that along to your colleagues and share. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
James, thank you.